welcome to VNN Canada with me, Nivedna Prabhu. On today's episode, I am joined in by Dr. Azad Kaushik, who is a renowned immunologist. Thank you so much, Dr. Kaushik, for joining us on our show today.
Thank you, Nivedna, for having me. Thank you.
We're, of course, continuing to discuss about coronavirus and the impact it has on the global world. But having said that, the first question to you would be, in a positive manner, New Zealand has been doing a good job. Although, of course, it's sparsely populated. How do you see their way of tackling with the pandemic? Is it good? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, you see that the problem with COVID-19 has to do with the transmission. And New Zealand is geographically very well placed. Somehow it is isolated as a country. And once you seal the borders and travel, and it's as you said rightly, it's sparsely populated. So those are the kind of issues that kind of provide a kind of environment where the transmission of the virus can be checked in some ways. And if the control measures that have been taken in New Zealand, they have been working, actually. I mean, there's a big contrast if you would compare New Zealand with Italy or Spain, for example, or UK, where the population density is high. And somehow, if the lockdown was not put in place to control the situation, then that kind of spread of the COVID-19 was in a way out of control. That's what happened in the UK. I mean, there's an interesting story coming out of Sweden as well. I mean, they had an entirely different approach. They only isolated the elderly, and the rest of the population, they tried to ask, well, you behave in a responsible manner, take responsibility to avoid this infection. So in New Zealand, that's what they have done, actually. The population has responded in a very responsible way, and their geographical location is their advantage, and that's how they have been able to check that. But having said that, whether it's New Zealand or any other country for that matter, the transmission of COVID-19 is very spatial. And so it would use the same modus operandi to spread, whether it is Sweden or UK or United States or Australia or New Zealand. So it just has to do with the geographics and good civil responsibility by the citizens, and also by the government action.
Right. So talking about the government, of course, Doug Ford and of course the Liberal Party, in terms of Prime Minister Trudeau, they've been ensuring, different phases for the people of Canada. And they are now set to do a 5-phase plan. How do you look at this? Do you think this is the need of the hour?
Well, yes. As we spoke last time, you see, we can't have a lockdown indefinitely. We can't shut down our economy indefinitely. And so initial stages, our goal was at this time that our hospitals are not inundated by patients. That was the concern at that time, whether we had the medical infrastructure to handle a large number of patients suffering from COVID-19. So this lockdown has helped flatten the curve. And that is a very positive sign. Now, the question is opening the economy. And my suggestion in that regard was that we need to identify, isolate, quarantine. And those who are COVID-19 negative should be allowed to go back to regenerate or restart our economy in some ways. So this 5-phase plan, I think we have done extremely well in Canada. Our governments have behaved in a very responsible way, both at federal and provincial level. So we have been able to check it, and I think this is the right approach to move forward. The only thing that I would say is, on the part of citizens, that we should not take it as a sign that this is a normal kind of situation now, and we can go with our life as usual as it was in the past before COVID-19. I would say COVID-19 is going to last a year or two. and not until we have an effective vaccine, we would be in a position to have a normal life. So let me say it this way: there's going to be a new normal now, and this new normal is going to be that we have to take precautions. For example, the grocery stores, I mean, some of them have actually said that you have to have a mask if you want to come shopping and those kind of things. So we have to now act as a responsible citizen. That's one thing very important. Our government has done everything that they could do. They have succeeded in flattening the curve. Of course, there has been a loss of life. Our elderly would still be susceptible to this disease. And we are beginning to know a little more about COVID-19 virus. And I'll be happy to discuss what do we know new about COVID-19 virus and why these kind of complications. So I would leave at that thought. I think we are in a good shape, and our government is doing an excellent job. They have stood the test of time.
So you believe that we have stood the test of time. Before I let you go, you of course are also a professor, and you are associated with a university. So in terms of that, how do you look at the education aspect of it being affected in the longer term? Because yes, there's a 5-phase thing, and you're saying that this could be the new normal. So in terms of education, will students get to go back to in-person classes, or will virtual teaching be the new normal?
Well, it would be, in my opinion, a combination of the two. It would be online teaching and in-person teaching.
Okay.
But I guess that we have no choice until we have a very effective preventive measure. This physical distancing would have to be respected. We have to find a way somehow that we can go through online courses, for example.
Yeah.
Now these technologies of video conferencing is coming in place. Media is a very important component of the education as well. So media, illustrations, these video conferences, these are going to be there. The evaluation of students would also be a challenge in these kind of situations. So the examinations would have to be arranged in a way that we are genuinely able to evaluate a person's knowledge and learning at the same time. So I would say the universities would have to readjust to these new situations. Certainly it is not going to be the same as it used to be.
Yes.
There are certain instances where an interaction with a professor is a must, and that can be actually arranged in some ways through physical distancing. That should not be a problem, but the bigger classes would be a challenge. It is impossible now to have those big classes of 400 and 500 students taking a course. That is out of question. Those kind of courses would have to be delivered online, essentially. So educational system is in for a drastic change until we are in control of the situation.
Okay, and your final thoughts about the virus, any thought in terms of your experience, would you say that how is this going to be affecting the community further? Is there any word on that, whether we have found any kind of solution to the virus?
Well, I can go for a historical record. When we had 1918 Spanish flu, at that time, that pandemic lasted 2 years, and it took 50 million lives during those times. And those were the times very different from now. There were not so many means of communication or travel. Travel was limited somehow. Even during those days, you can imagine that 50 million people lost their lives. So what I would say is that the biggest problem with COVID-19 is its ability to spread somehow. And so it is going to continue to spread. There is no doubt about that.
Okay.
Herd immunity. I mean, I would say these are the early stages of the pandemic. out of 7 billion population, now we have only about 3 million or so affected. So herd immunity would develop when we have a significant proportion of the population uh, that has been infected or got the infection from COVID-19, then they recovered out of this and are now immune to this. And those would be the population that would not allow the spread of the virus from person to person. But
Right.
that situation would happen when you have anywhere 60 to 80% of the population that has been exposed to COVID-19. And that's a very long journey. And that's why I said it'll take a year or two, unless we have an effective vaccine in the meantime. Having said that, there are a few new informations that have emerged out now.
Yeah.
One thing now we are beginning to analyze how the immune system is responding to this virus. Because some people are asymptomatic, they have no disease whatsoever. There are others who have very severe kind of acute respiratory distress syndrome, and these people need to be put on ventilator, and most of those who go on ventilator die actually. So why this kind of variability, and children are getting affected now also. So we are beginning to understand a bit how this COVID-19 virus is affecting the immune system. Now, this is the problem with this virus, that it is able to very quickly infect lots of cells in the body through ACE2, or a receptor that we talked last time. Now, once it gets inside the body, it is in fact hurting the immune system in some ways.
Right.
It is making the immune system respond in a cytotoxic manner that is causing lots of tissue damage and so on, organ damage also. And at the same time, it has a kind of situation that it allows the virus to persist because the immune system is exhausted in some ways. It can no longer respond to the virus. So there are two things it is doing. One, it is causing cytotoxicity. That means it is toxic to the body cells and body tissue and organs. On the other hand, the immune system in some ways fails to respond and protect against this virus. And these are the individuals who are getting a more severe kind of disease. The second thing that we are beginning to see, as we talked about in terms of prevention, there's a big race going on for making vaccines. Some companies have already advanced, and I do know that some human trials have already been started at Oxford University. I'm eagerly watching those trials. What is the outcome of those? Second thing that we are getting some news from Holland and also United States that they have been successful in generating antibodies that can neutralize this virus.
Okay.
So if we are able to generate, so that would be supportive of plasma therapy that we have been talking about. We can take this convalescent serum from those individuals who have recovered out of COVID-19 infection. That can be used to cure in some ways or to minimize the disease or put the disease under control in those individuals who are at severe state of disease. So that does give a hope. So antibodies generated in the body that can neutralize the virus, they can be quickly produced, and that does give us some hope. Third thing that I would say is this antiviral drug, remdesivir, is showing some promise. And this drug actually inhibits an enzyme, what we call RNA polymerase. This enzyme actually does not allow multiplication of the virus inside the cell.
Okay.
So this drug also offers some hope in terms of combination therapy. Coming to some other molecules, there are two molecules that are considered to be very important now. That one is what we call the cells communicate with each other by releasing certain messenger molecules. And one of those messenger molecules is IL-6. It is part of our innate immunity. It is a
Right.
part of our natural immunity somehow. And high levels of IL-6 are seen in COVID-19 patients.
Yeah.
And, and IL-6 is responsible for hyper innate immunity or hyperinflammation. And this is what is responsible for causing toxicity as a result of immune reaction.
Okay.
Second thing is that this virus is causing immunosuppression. One, it does not allow certain interferons. Interferons are another kind of messenger molecules, and they have antiviral property. So this virus, upon infection, does not allow production of those kind of molecules that should be protecting the human body. And that's one limitation over here. And finally, I would say that if the virus persists longer,
Yeah.
more the toxicity to the body, more toxic to the body, and also not allowing the immune system to respond effectively. In fact, it causes immunosuppression.
Okay.
Those are some of the limitations that we are seeing. But let me say it this way, there does seem to be a bright light at the end of the tunnel, and that is that we may have an effective vaccine against probably this spike protein, for example, or through other approaches. Secondly, antibody is proving to be effective. So plasma therapy would be more used in case of COVID-19 severe cases. And finally, we would come out through our security measures or these social measures or socio-economic and political measures to somehow stop the spread of the infection.
Okay, so I think you've summed it up fantastically with, of course, all the facts of how we could see probably light at the end of the tunnel, like you rightly said so. But again, coming back to point number one, like you always say, do not panic and follow social distancing, wear your masks, your gloves, and ensure that you're doing your bit to maintain the flattening of the curve, which is only going to help us win the battle against this pandemic. So
Yes.
on that note, I would like to thank you for giving us all these valuable points that you have, and of course, coming on the show today.
Just the last point that I would say is please do wear the mask. Mask is very important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For sure. We're going to make sure that everybody knows that they're supposed to do their bit by wearing their mask and their gloves also. Thank you so much, Dr. Kaushik. We appreciate you coming on VNN Canada. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Nivedana.